Right.
So he was in Seinfeld's apartment.
That's amazing.
Right? So the whole meeting, we had a board meeting this morning and he's sitting in Jerry Seinfeld's apartment, you know?
We had, we had one of our folks who's going to be on the call in just a moment, Roy, who has been collecting backgrounds. And we have two from the temple, one that is, as if I were sitting in the balcony of the sanctuary.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It does sort of forego, I think, the little bit of voyeurism that everybody's experiencing in this digital Zoom age in which you get to see into each other's homes. And
right. Yes, I know. I'm always a little bit like, what's behind me? What's going on? Right. Yeah, it's very, so interesting. And speaking of sort of makeshift things, I made the most incredible mask out of shoelaces that I literally took out of my shoes and I threaded into a napkin. And that was one, I have several different ones, but you got to get creative right now. Yeah.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am, excuse me, looking forward to a really special conversation today with my good friend David Daniels from Public Counsel. More on him in just a moment, but I thought I would begin by, well, first I'm going to notice Roy's background. This became a thing last week, and David and I were just talking about it. So I think Roy, I think I could be wrong. I think that is a library.
It is.
I think it is a library at our alma mater, the University of Southern California.
Correct. It's Doheny Library.
That's what I was going to say. My second favorite library at USC. My first favorite library at USC is the philosophy library.
Oh, down at Mudd Hall?
Yes, because it's small, no one knows it's there, and it's beautiful. But yes.
Oh, yes.
Doheny Library. Okay, I like this. This is good. We have this ongoing game now. If I can spot Roy's and identify his backgrounds. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day to learn with us a little bit today. I thought I'd begin by sharing a few thoughts about Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israeli Independence Day, which is tonight and tomorrow. And the two thoughts that I think are germane to our conversation today in many ways is that Israel was really founded out of this belief and desire to create the opportunity for the Jewish people to self-determine their future and destiny, and to be self-reliant and to be empowered to determine one's own fate, to not be dependent or at the whim of those with more power. The other related thought is that the Israeli national anthem that some of us are familiar with, called Hatikva, means the hope. That Israel is really about hope, and the hope for this self-determination, for this self-realization, for this independence. And it occurred to me that in many different ways, so much of the work that Public Counsel does is really about that same hope, and about helping folks who have less power be able to become empowered to self-determine their own future, to not have to be at the whim of landlords, to not have to be at the whim of financial services industry, to be able to come out from under that and have that hope. And so I thought that appropriate that we're having this conversation today on the eve of Yom Ha'atzmaut, which again, in so many ways is about that hope that Israel stands for, that it is still very much aspirational, but that's the work of Israel, and in many ways the work of Public Counsel and all of us who spend time in this space of social services and trying to help those who are on the margins of our society. particularly these days in this era of coronavirus. So my good friend David Daniels is the pro bono director at Public Counsel. Public Counsel is, I'm going to get this right, the largest pro bono public interest legal services organization firm in the world. It's the country, but that really means the world, right? It sounds self-serving when you say it that way, but it's true. And we've had the pleasure of knowing each other for, I don't know, going on a decade, something like that. And collaborating together, first with legal clinics at the Temple before the Karsh Center ever opened, and now through Karsh, particularly with the amazing bankruptcy work that they do, and some of the tenant work as well. So David, welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's great to be here.
And I thought we might begin, a lot of folks maybe are familiar with some aspects of Public Counsel, but can you just kind of give us like the Google Earth view of Public Counsel and what you guys do and why you're so amazing?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. As you said, we are the nation's largest pro bono law firm. We've been around now. This is our 50th year, so we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, which is a big, a really big deal for us, and we're just really so proud and honored to be able to continue to serve the community. And work with all the amazing partners that we work with, like the Karsh Center, and so we have 8 separate law projects at Public Counsel. We are a full-service law firm, and we have over 75 attorneys and nearly 30 or 40, I guess now. Actually pushing on 50, support staff. So it's a really large kind of general practice firm. And we, as I said, have 8 separate law projects. We do everything from Center for Veterans Advancement work, so kind of benefits support and sort of legal advocacy work for veterans. We have a very robust community development project that assists nonprofit businesses and small businesses and childcare operators that are serving vulnerable communities. We have a consumer rights and economic justice project that represents the interests of consumers, particularly victims of consumer fraud, and litigates on their behalf to really protect their interests. We have a homelessness prevention law project that's been around for a long time that really focuses on ensuring housing stability in the community, both by representing tenants who are at risk of eviction and also, just advising folks on really what their rights are, and so that their housing is protected. And they also do quite a bit of public benefits work to support people's income and to ensure their stability in relationship to their housing. We have an immigrants' rights project that's probably one of our largest projects and has been incredibly active, particularly during the current administration in Washington that has been pushing hard on our immigrants and and really trying to sort of narrow rights that has really been jeopardizing the stability of so many of the folks in the immigrant community. We have a women and girls rights project that's actually funded by the Audrey Ermis Foundation, and it's been doing a lot of work on behalf of women and girls, particularly in the employment space for low wage earning women who are vulnerable and don't necessarily have the ability to push back on their own with their employers. So doing a lot of direct advocacy work, but also policy work on behalf of women and girls, both in the education space and as well as in the workers' rights space legislatively. And then we have an opportunity under law project, which is our impact litigation project, which looks at systemic issues across the board and seeks to change systems that are broken through litigation in a number of areas, including education, and literacy and workers' rights. And then finally, our Children's Rights Project does a tremendous amount of work for kids in our community, assisting with adoptions of kids out of the foster care system, looking at the needs of transition age foster youth, looking at the needs of kids in our school systems who are being unfairly disciplined, looking at the disciplinary systems themselves in the education space. So that's kind of an overview of what we do. And we do all this work by relying on nearly 5,000 volunteer attorneys, paralegals, and law students each year. So our model really is built on the pro bono framework that the organization was founded upon. And so we really cannot do this work without the really generous law firms, corporate in-house legal departments, solo practitioners, paralegals, law students, all the great folks, that are also connected to Karsh and to the temple, and that work with us to do this work. So yeah, that's an overview.
I mean, that's a staggering portfolio of services that you guys provide to folks who are in such need. How has this, bizarre reality that we're all living in this crisis impacted your services to clients? Really
good question. I mean, it's been devastating for so many, and what we've seen is it's been devastating on two fronts, in the most marked way, and that's on the income stability of our clients, and then also on the housing stability of our clients. So when it comes to income stability, there's even a recent report that was done by the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley that came out this week, and that's looking really at this shocking fact around, income loss. And in particular for the County of Los Angeles, we've got a situation where 50% of our county's workforce have lost their jobs, their incomes, right? So Los Angeles is in this unusual position in relationship kind of to other parts of the country in terms of the type of work we do here and how people earn a living. We're particularly vulnerable because the work that goes on in this community, is dependent very much on the entertainment industry, which has been shut down, and then very dependent on service industries like, the food establishments that we've all loved and we love to patronize, restaurants, even street vendors, which is part of our culture, have been devastated by this kind of shutdown of our daily activities. And with this shutdown it's thrusted many folks, into this, who were already living kind of on the edge, into this unfathomable sort of income insecurity, that's really been challenging. And then at the same time you have this income insecurity, you're also having, housing insecurity, right? Because people can no longer pay for their housing or at risk of not being able to pay for their housing. So keeping folks housed, even under normal circumstances, we've all learned is really critical to the mental and physical stability of a person, of a family. And we've seen that. And that's why, Public Counsel's Homelessness Prevention Law Project, its mission over time has always been to keep people housed instead of having to fight to get them back into housing, because the cost of losing your housing and having to get somebody back in, from the mental, the physical, the economics of all of that is really profound. So with that, when you add this risk associated with viral transmission of being on the street and being vulnerable in that context, it becomes even more paramount that we keep people in place and we do everything we can to keep them housed. And so how we've shifted on that front, on the housing front, as we've become more aggressive towards greater policy work, greater need, greater advocacy work to really protect people's housing, and then also greater information sharing so people understand their rights around their housing. And on the policy front, there's been a lot of movement in local government, statewide legislation to protect people's housing, the eviction moratoria that you've been reading about, suspending all types of no-fault evictions, suspending evictions for, minor lease violations like having a pet in violation of a no pet clause, instituting policies that would, that would allow for a 12-month repay period for tenants who have been unable to pay their rent due to the COVID crisis, freezes on rent increases, and then even with all of this type of legislative kind of advocacy we've been doing, we're still getting tons of calls from people, being harassed by their landlords, threatened with evictions still. So we're having to push back also just directly in terms of representing them in relationship to understanding their rights and with in relationship to their landlords. And then, as I said, there's been a lot of information sharing we've been doing on our website through through FAQs that we've created for the community to really understand what position they're in and what they can do to protect themselves. And then on the income stability side, how things have changed, there's been a shift towards really helping, a whole new kind of community of people that are at risk. And for example, gig workers, people in the entertainment industry, below the line workers, who've now completely lost all lines of income because there's no work going on in that industry. Helping them access the new benefits that have come online through the Federal CARES Act that are now providing unemployment insurance for people who are not traditionally classified as employees. Working on creating webinars and information sharing so that they understand their rights. And even our work has even turned to more grassroots efforts to fundraise on behalf of folks like street vendors who are undocumented typically, or in many instances, and do not have access to the web of benefits that have been created federally or on a state level to fill those income streams that have been lost. And so we've had to get into sort of spaces to really do some very effective fundraising to help them sort of stabilize their income streams. So that's been a shift. And let me just spin, kind of one other area where we've seen kind of a lot of shift is in the needs of the small businesses and nonprofits that we represent typically that are serving the community. They are businesses like any other business, and now they're facing revenue stream losses. They are facing the fact that they may have to lay off or furlough employees. They are facing operational issues if they're a child care provider, and they now have a county ordinance telling them that in order to operate, they have to maintain the kids in a social distanced framework. How does that work when you have little kids running around? All of those kinds of business operational issues and financial stability issues are affecting our clients just like every other business. And so we're having to provide legal advice, practical advice, business advice, to all of them. So, that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of some of the pivoting or refocusing that's been going on. Yeah.
Well, the last point you made was a question I had, which is, I know so much of the work that you do, I would say in a way focuses on an individual, right? So my initial question was, do you have clients who are business owners or employers, as it were? And how they are navigating this space, right? I mean, most of us probably have been reading about the, shall we say, muddled rollout of the payroll protection program, which thankfully looks like has received additional funding, and how that's going to be managed. And, we'll see in 8 weeks how and if those loans are actually forgiven.
Right.
But the needs that you're seeing, amongst sort of the folks who are by necessity having to lay off employees,
correct,
maybe committed folks, but are in that space where they don't have the resources to be a client of, a big firm,
right?
Or even to have an attorney on retainer. So what does that piece of the work look like?
Right. So, really good question. So we do represent small businesses and we do represent nonprofits, and we've been doing that for a long time. And you're absolutely right. They can't afford, to pay the hourly rates to a major firm, for example, labor and employment advice. But the beauty of Public Counsel's model is that we partner with those major firms and they come to us and offer their services pro bono to these clients. And in this particular context, because they typically are representing employers on the employer side of the equation, this does not create a conflict of interest for them, right? Because they're similarly representing employers in this context as well, right? Oftentimes in the pro bono space, there are conflicts between what a big firm can do and what our clients' needs are, because they're essentially operating in two different spheres. But in this context, fortunately, there is this synergy that exists, and the major law firms that have significant labor and employment practices are able and very willing to step into this space and help these businesses with their advisory needs and walking them through what they might need to do, or how they, to respond to a potential furloughing situation or a layoff situation. And that this is certainly not a situation that anybody wanted to be in, but having the access to those pro bono resources has been really helpful. And we've been able to work with some of the firms to even create a sort of a hotline / sort of fast tracking model, so that some of these businesses, they can get their questions answered really quickly rather than having to, wait a week or two. These questions have to be answered within hours of their being posed, because things are so fluid. So yeah, so we're very blessed to have these relationships and to be able to serve these clients that way.
So just because I want to say it even more plainly for folks, because I think sometimes it people don't realize, right? But for the entire model of the volunteer pro bono attorneys, right? You're saying, if I'm a small business owner, let's say I have an employment issue, I can't afford, somebody from Ogletree Deacons or wherever at, $800-900 an hour.
Right.
But that same attorney is maybe a volunteer at Public Counsel, and I actually get that same legal service without the, 4-figure price tag.
That is exactly right.
Which is remarkable, I think. And that's why I want to kind of underscore that for folks.
Yeah. And I think
you've seen in that volunteer space that, I don't know, that like everybody's working hard, everybody's working from home, but are you finding that you have attorneys that have more bandwidth for volunteer time now because they're not working 90 hours a week from home?
Yes, that is a really good question. We are seeing capacity in certain areas. I think particularly in the transactional space. So that would be like, corporate transactional attorneys or labor and employment attorneys. Labor and employment attorneys, actually, they're actually pretty busy, because they are representing businesses that have, all of these kind of business pressure issues. But in the corporate transactional space, people that are normal sort of deal facilitators, mergers and acquisition facilitators, large real estate property purchase facilitators, large investment facilitators, a lot of that work has been put on hold by their private paying clients because of the uncertainty in the economy. And so they do have more capacity, and they are coming to us wanting to help. And they are very adept at reviewing contracts. They're very adept at reviewing regulatory frameworks that businesses are operating in, and they're not stepping into something that they're unfamiliar with. So I think we've been very blessed to be able to kind of further activate those relationships and respond and connect them to matters. And that's been a blessing. And I have to say that the major law firms that we work with in particular on a regional level and on a national level have been very involved in the disaster relief effort. You know, they are coordinating amongst themselves. They are coming into regional collaboratives, statewide collaboratives that are focused on disaster relief, on the COVID relief. And we're all kind of talking very, very directly. I mean, David Lash, who's very involved in your temple, who's very involved with the Audrey Ermis Foundation, you know, is as a national leader on the pro bono, in the pro bono space. He's O'Melveny and Myers national firm-wide pro bono partner. You know, he was formerly the executive director at Bethesda. You know, he's passionate about pro bono. He's a perfect example of somebody who is carrying this conversation forward, seeing the opportunity and the capacity on the private side and the private firm side, and saying, hey, what can we do? How can we transfer that capacity over? Where can we kind of flip, you know, move into these gaps that are now being created by this crisis? And so, you know, we're blessed to have people like David, you know, who are so knowledgeable and so generous, you know. Yeah.
We are all blessed to have people like David, who I'm privileged to call a friend, and yes, a longtime temple member. And from the very beginning, folks who were with us on an earlier episode heard me mention him as sort of in some ways, the architect initially of the legal service program at Karsh. And if I can twist his arm, probably a future guest of ours in an upcoming week.
Oh, that'd be great.
You know, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned undocumented folks, below the line workers, street vendors, things like that. It got me thinking particularly of restaurant workers. Some of our participants who know me well know that I'm a foodie of sorts and have my favorite restaurants, and it pains me to know that many of them, if not most, will probably not survive this. And just thinking that restaurants in many cases, particularly you know, neighborhood restaurants, family-owned restaurants, are one of the few opportunities for undocumented folks to be employed, you know, that you'll never see from the floor of the restaurant. Right. And how those, you know, I imagine as intense as this experience and crisis is for people at all levels, it's even more so for them. You know, as you mentioned, they're not necessarily able to access some of the benefits and services that are out there. Right. What is that looking like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where you know, kind of creativity and grassroots partnerships are emerging. You know, to create funding streams, you know, to fill some of those gaps. But I think that's also where, you know, organizations like Public Counsel, and in partnership with a number of, you know, collaboratives and coalitions, are looking to local, to regional, to state government, to create programs to fill that void, right? Because on a federal level, we're not seeing that kind of support. You know, the federal government has not suddenly made a 180-degree turn on its perspectives on undocumented workers. You know, it's to the contrary. You know, on the day that, you know, the COVID-19 shutdown, you know, really went into full force in the county. You know, you had ICE, you know, conducting raids and placing people in detention facilities, and exposing these people potentially to the virus itself, right? And we've been involved in litigation, you know, in the detention facilities, and have been successful in getting these folks released because of the health risks. But I just point that out because on a federal level, you're not seeing the support that's really necessary, obviously, to meet the needs of these undocumented workers who really do so much in so many aspects, in terms of the food chain, in terms of getting food to the marketplace in terms of our restaurants, as you mentioned. So I think it's really, it's a combination of grassroots efforts that are looking at creating funding streams on their own, but it's also organizations like Public Counsel and others placing pressure on local and state legislators who are sympathetic, who are very sympathetic to these workers. We are so blessed to live in a state with a governor and with local leaders who really care about these folks and understand how critical it is to support them, and how much they are equal. They are equal members and deserving members of all of our support in this community. And so I think it's just more of those conversations and more of those pressures, and speaking to our legislators about the equity and inclusion that involves everyone, and in particular those who are undocumented and who are struggling. That I think is the work that we all need to continue to do.
In thinking about that same population, just from a logistics standpoint, in the way that you're delivering services to clients right now, which I'm assuming is not face-to-face, so one, what does that look like? Probably something like this. And two, is that even more challenging? Because I'm imagining that, I'm an undocumented worker, in the back of a restaurant or a street vendor. I'm probably not sitting at home with an iPad, and good stable Wi-Fi and access to Zoom.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. We've definitely had challenges in representation for those communities who are really the most vulnerable. Many of our clients do have smartphones, so they do have access to telephonic communication, and some of them do have also access to internet service through their phones, and so we are able to communicate in some ways. But yes, that has been a struggle, and I think some of the work really has been happening through networking and channeling, and through kind of community circles that have ways to share information with them, and on a very sort of literally on the pavement, but not physically sort of in face to face. It's just been through getting information to other service centers that may be able to communicate with them better. But I think also we have had struggles with getting documents signed and getting documents get to us so that we can get them filed in the immigration context or something on that level. So kind of we've just had to be very creative at times about how we do that, and it has not been easy. I think it has been a challenge for sure. And I think that's where also funding streams and income streams for these workers, so they can continue to maintain their cell phone policies, and they can pay for they can have access to information is key. And I think that's part of why making sure we have they don't completely go without income is essential.
Have you seen any change to the client that's coming in the door, right? Has the profile of the average client changed? Do you see people that 8 weeks ago never thought they'd need your help, that suddenly,
Yes.
just because of the effects of this, or we're not there yet?
No, absolutely. So about 3 weeks ago, the Josh Groden, who's the CEO and president of Legendary Entertainment, came to us, and because he was getting a lot of pressure just from all of the people that he works with in the industry, as his entertainment company works with in the industry, to really educate them and help them understand how they can access income streams, because they've lost everything, and so these are caterers, these are lighting specialists, these are makeup artists, these are costumers, these are people that work below the line in the industry, but are not people that we would typically see at the doorstep of public counsel, because ordinarily their income streams would not qualify them for our services. We have a specific thresholds of income that people must meet or be under in order to qualify for our pro bono services. And so suddenly, there's this whole community of folks, like, as I said, the entertainment gig workers, who we would never ordinarily see, and frankly, had never experienced or had any understanding of the unemployment insurance sort of process, or the other types of benefits that they are now entitled to through the CARES Act, through federal legislation. So what we needed to do, and what we did in partnership with Legendary Entertainment, is we put on a webinar that over 900 people attended in the industry. Over 1,000 people have signed up sort of for additional information, specifically, with folks from the county, folks from the city, folks from, who traditionally represented employees in unemployment insurance and benefits context. We had them all in the webinar, sort of with our Women and Girls Rights Project, the Audrey Irmis Project, leading kind of the charge to educate folks on just how you move through the insurance forms, given that they weren't necessarily set up initially for people who are non-traditional workers, and then there was a lot of effort legislatively on the governor's office to get the EDD, and the administrators of the unemployment insurance benefits to get more workers in that space to help, to reach out to these people, to facilitate this program. So in answer to your question, yes, we are definitely seeing folks that we ordinarily would never see. And that again goes back to, when you have 50% of the workforce, out of work, you suddenly, who have zero revenue streams. And we know that statistically, so many people are income insecure, that they are living paycheck to paycheck, or 1-2 paychecks away from housing instability. This is just compounding this problem that runs more deeply in our society, and it is creating a different profile, a different client with needs. Absolutely, yeah.
It's so interesting, and you started by touching on folks in the entertainment industry, which of course is such a large source of employment here in Southern California, from the top to a makeup artist, right, or a gaffer on a set, but
right.
Production is completely shut down. And
right.
Nothing. I talked to a friend of mine last night who's in the music management business, and I hope for his sake, I don't think he's going to be a client of yours anytime soon, but he said, this is really bad. He said, there's no concerts, so what am I got nothing.
Right. I mean, I live in a condominium complex. It's small. It has 12 separate units. 6 out of the 12, so 50% of the units in my building alone, are occupied by gig workers, people in the entertainment industry, below the line workers. So that's just my building alone. That's 50% of my building is now sitting without any income stream. And I reached out to them and said, hey, here we're doing this webinar. You should attend, and they did. But I'm just one example of what the broader sort of picture looks like in this community. And it's a very, very it's completely, to say unprecedented is just is an understatement. It's hard to put words to it, but and I think this kind of points, I think, also to what one of the things that's really in the forefront of our minds at Public Counsel as we look forward, and that is this notion of a just recovery, right? how do you create a just recovery, right? That's all inclusive, that includes the undocumented workers, that includes folks that traditionally may not have needed to access benefits and income streams, but now do need to access them. How does that sort of, that framework of justice, of complete justice in the recovery process really get shaped and implemented? And I think that's where, organizations like Public Counsel are focusing their advocacy as we look forward. It's really looking at those places, those pressure points where, there's not enough focus right now. And we even know with the CARES Act, with a whole sort of array of federal benefits, it's completely left so many folks out of the loop, and many businesses who were not able, with the loans that came out, many businesses were not able to access those loans. And, there's a second wave, but again, when you're talking about a just and complete recovery, it can't be just for those who happen to be big enough and have friends on the inside at a bank who they can get to more quickly. It's got to be for everyone, right? And that's really, I think, the challenge for all of us to think about that framework through a lens of justice, right?
Right. What's the old adage? A rising tide lifts all ships, right? I mean, that's what we need.
Right. Yeah.
And all too often, and thus far, it seems like not quite what we're getting.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. I could pick your brain all day, but I know that a lot of the folks joining us probably have questions too that have been kind of simmering in their minds. So either an old-fashioned hand raise if your video's on, a digital hand raise, you can put a question in the chat. I see Merle here. I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
Okay, so I realize that you're pro bono. Is
Right.
there any expectation of any kind of minimal payback or donations or whatever for these people receiving services?
So no, if your question, I'm sorry, Merle, is when we provide pro bono services to our clients, in whatever space that is, there is absolutely no expectation that they pay us back. It's really pro bono in its truest form. And I mean, people who are lawyers and know this better than I do, really. We are one of the only professions that has built into its ethical responsibilities, its professional responsibilities, the idea of pro bono, right? Doctors, there are many doctors who are tremendously generous, and there are organizations like Doctors Without Borders, but the medical profession actually does not have a specific, sort of historically rooted component of its professional responsibility that's tied to this idea of pro bono. And that's unusual, but it's what lawyers kind of know coming into the profession, that we are called to help people access justice, and one important way we're called to do that is through pro bono. So yeah. Yeah.
My other really quick question is, you say you're across the country, across the world. Are you in other states? I mean, are you like in Arizona?
So that's a good question.
Example.
Yeah, so very good question. We are Public Counsel is located in Los Angeles County. The majority of our clients are in Southern California and the Los Angeles County area. Our primary offices are in Koreatown in Los Angeles, and we're also embedded in many of the court environments in LA County. But some of our work is national, and certainly our veterans benefits work is national. And then our Opportunity Under Law project, which does impact work, it looks at systemic breakdowns throughout the country. And I wanted to just mention that in the Gary B.V. Snyder case that just came out from the Sixth Circuit a couple days ago, that was just a magnificent victory for our Opportunity Under Law team at Public Counsel. That's a case that we filed against the Detroit school district in Michigan, and sought to establish what we believe has always been the case, and that is a fundamental right to a basic education and literacy in this country. And the Detroit school system is one of the most deplorable sort of systems in terms of conditions that you could imagine, with, you know, age-old books and that are way outdated, and just horrible classroom conditions and not enough teachers. And so this opinion that came out based on this case we filed along with Sidley Austin in Detroit, you know, finds that there really is this fundamental right for every child to have this basic education. And this decision really looked very directly at the history of subjugation in this country through the denial of access to education, and called us to remember, you know, the time when it was a crime at one point in our history to teach a slave to read. That the Ku Klux Klan made intimidation of teachers willing to teach and educate people of color the focus of their terrorism. You know, that's part of our history, and these dark narratives in our nation's history are re-examined in this decision. And we're really so proud that it's for me, I think it's one of, if not the most, it's certainly one of the most important you know, constitutional decisions of my lifetime. It's the first, you know, it's really takes Brown v. Board of Education, you know, kind of the step further that it always needed to take. And I think you know, this is really a tremendous case. And, you know, New York Times has reported on it, you know, in the last couple of days. But I use that as an example of the broad reach of our work. And again, in representing the plaintiffs in Detroit who have children who are not literate as a result of those deplorable conditions. You know, we were representing them, we were representing the class, we were representing the folks pro bono with, you know, no expectation. And you know, that case really has obvious national implications. So
Thank you. This is, I think you guys are doing incredible stuff. Amazing.
Thank you.
Others? Other questions, thoughts? Okay.
Well, we love our partnership with the Temple and Cars. So proud of it, and it's been such a pleasure working with you, Beau. You know, really, I just really can't say enough about all the great work you do and opportunity you create and support you provide in the community. So really wonderful, and yeah, just grateful to be able to share and talk with you today.
Thank you, David. Jess has a question. Jess,
Sure.
I'll unmute you, or you can throw it here. Here we go. Jess's question is, how does the recent 60-day pause on green cards affect your clients? And do you think this pause will continue?
That's a good question. You know, I haven't received any specific feedback yet from our Immigrants' Rights Project. You know, I think any kind of pause, anything like that, that's creating further uncertainty or instability is just upping the anxiety that our clients are constantly feeling and facing. You know, so I can only say that you know, I'm not aware of, you know, any particular, you know, calls or coming in, you know, but I think it's one more example of, you know, of the restrictions and the and sort of the assaults that we have seen, you know, on people, on immigrants in our community. And I think at a time when there's already so much anxiety, you know, any kind of any movement that really increases that is very painful to see. But you know, I can't really speak more specifically to that other than I can tell you just generally, you know, the immigrant population that we work with is, you know, is just suffering and continues to suffer. And we're doing all we can to support them and to fight for them. But it's difficult. It is very difficult. You know, so we're committed and we're doing all we can, and both on a sort of impact litigation front, you know, systemically, and then, you know, for example, in our litigation over, you know, the family separation policy, you know, that caused devastating trauma to families and to kids, you know, and that we filed suit over, and that, you know, through that litigation, you know, caused the government to have to step up and really speak to these traumas, and you know, but you know, our work continues. It's just it keeps going, but it's difficult. It's very difficult.
Absolutely. Well, I commend you and all the folks at Public Counsel and all the volunteers that, you know, the work does go on even when it is difficult, because that's the only way, right? There's an old Jewish adage the rabbis teach that even though the day is short and the task is great, that you have to do something. You can't detest from it, is the word they use, right? That paralysis is not an option, even if we're overwhelmed. So we move on, we move forward. David, thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah.
So generous with your time. And next week, hopefully everyone will join us again. We'll check out what Roy's digital background is next week. A teaser next week, we have Mark LaRanger, who's the CEO of an organization called Chrysalis. Chrysalis is a job training and sort of economic stability program organization based on Skid Row, also in Santa Monica, and I believe last year opened in Orange County as well. And also a remarkable guy doing remarkable work, which seems to be, thankfully, the theme here on Tuesday mornings. So David, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds good.